Good morning. It's good to see you all. Junior Church, you are dismissed. Walk. A man once told a story about his 84-year-old grandmother. Now, this was not your typical grandmother. She fiercely maintained her independence. Her 4 children and several of her grandchildren lived in the same town, but because she was so fiercely independent, she rarely called on them to help her with anything. So when she called her grandson, asking him for help, he knew this had to be important, because she would never do this. When he arrived that morning, she suspected that, she told him, I suspect that there's a burglar in the bedroom closet because I heard noises last night. Why didn't you call me last night? He said. Well, it was late. I hated to bother you, so I just nailed the closet door shut and went to bed. That's an example of a type of faith that we're going to look at today. We're talking about building faith, and actually Merle, with the communion meditation, really hit the nail on what we're going. We're going to be talking about Abraham today and his faith. We need to have a faith that nails the doors of doubt shut and then calmly leaves the rest to God so we can peacefully sleep in His care. We're going to be talking about Abraham, where it says in Romans, the father of all who believe. And in Hebrews 11, we're repeatedly told why Abraham was so highly regarded by God. He believed in an inheritance that he himself would never really receive. He believed in a child that he was too old to father. And when asked to sacrifice the son that he was given as an offering, Abraham believed that God could and would raise that boy from the dead. And that is incredibly impressive. That's the kind of faith that the Bible is talking about here. We're in this series of building faith. Last week we looked at Acts 2, 42 through 47 and saw that the early church devoted to 4 main things of teachings, the apostles' teachings, fellowship, prayer, and communion. But in those things we saw how they devoted to each other. We cannot do church alone. So today, if you want to turn to Hebrews 11, and this chapter can be subtitled, The Heroes of Faith. This chapter talks about men and women who have lived by faith. And as we look to find ways to build our own faith, we need to turn to these examples, turn to them. Today we're going to look at Abraham. He's such a great man of faith. How he lived his life based on this faith. And I don't know about you, but I have found it hard while researching and reading about these true heroes of the faith that it seems really hard to relate to them. I mean, their faith was so strong. It was so huge. And it seems so hard for me to relate to something so substantial that one would be able to relate to this guy. In fact, the reports of Abraham are so impressive that we might feel like I can't even measure up to something like that. We might say, well, it might be easy for Abraham because he's different than me. I could never believe like that. I struggle with doubt. Or I struggle with fear. I struggle with my past. We can all throw out our little things, but there's something that's going to pull us away. But God knew that. He knew we would find it hard to relate to a superhero of faith like Abraham. So God tells us a few things about him that I bet Abraham wished would have been swept away under the rug and forgotten. For example, God told Abraham in Genesis 12:1, the Lord has said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land I'll show you. He said, leave your family. Leave your father's household. Leave all of your relatives. Well, Abraham didn't quite fully obey that part of the command. He took his nephew Lot with him and their household. And later on, we see that such a strong dispute happens within this family dynamic that they have to split. Lot's choice of pasture land that led him to Sodom and Gomorrah, and we see where this event all happened. All because Abraham didn't follow or obey God in the beginning. Then there's the promise God made about Abraham would have a son. Abraham kind of doubted it a little bit, but he ended up believing, but he had a hard time convincing his wife. In fact, Scripture says she laughed like, oh, that's crazy. That's just nuts. Not going to happen. But after all, they were both older. They were mature. I can't say that over. Okay. And so Sarah talked to Abram into observing a quaint custom at that time, which was partaking of the handmaiden to produce an heir. God did not say he would produce an heir that way. He said, you and your wife. So she asked her husband to sleep with her handmaiden, Hagar. The resulting offspring was Ishmael. Before long, the presence started of another conflict. We see Abraham didn't follow God in the beginning. It caused a conflict. We see Abraham did not follow God here. It created a conflict. But this conflict grew so much that his descendants of Ishmael are still into conflict with God's people today. And of course, then there's the one that I just laugh at. Abraham would not be complete without telling the time if he passed his wife off as his sister. This is just ridiculous. Genesis 12. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abraham said to his wife Sarah, look at you. You're a beautiful woman. Hey, guys, take a note here. Okay? Make sure you stop at every border of life and say, you're a beautiful woman. Okay? But don't do the next part. When the Egyptians see you, they'll say, this is his wife. Let's kill him. Then we can have her. So please tell them you're my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. He's basically saying, you're so gorgeous that they're going to want to sleep with you. And they'll kill me if you're my wife, so let them sleep with you and just say that you're my sister. That's what that deserves, right? God is not pleased with Abraham's decision and made it clear that he wasn't pleased with it. But Abraham, the father of all who believe, the father of the faith, did it again. He failed in the same scenario, the same sin, once in Egypt and later in near the city of Gerar. Why would a great man of faith, why would this man who was called by God pass his wife off to be a sister? Because of fear. Here I said earlier that it's hard to relate to him because of fear or doubt or our past. He could say the same thing about himself. He was so scared he was willing to give up the integrity of his marriage, his wife, for his life. That's embarrassing. So why would God tell us all these embarrassing stories of Abraham? Well, how do the faults of Abraham change how you look at him? He's no longer the Superman. Nothing can touch him. See, was God one of those types of parents that threatens their teenage daughter or teenage son that I'm going to display all of those embarrassing photos if you don't do what I say? Is he one of those empty threats? Now, I'll tell you right now, I have threatened my daughter. I have a couple pictures of her when she was, walking barely. There's the typical naked butt picture. She's standing up with her hands on the TV and she's looking back over her shoulder and smiling. I'm like, click, I'm keeping that one. And I will use that when you're a teenager. And then I have one that you will just have to ask about later because I can't share that right now, but it's my favorite one. And I threatened to use them against her. Were they empty threats or were they real? And I can tell you they were real for me. Because I learned, because my mom on my graduation day put out every single embarrassing photo of me at my high school graduation party. Where everybody's supposed to come and say, hey, great job, good job. They came and said, hey, wow, you look goofy. Is God that type of God who's going to sit there and say, I'm going to threaten you but never do it? Or is he one who's going to hold it? God didn't share these events just to embarrass him. God told us these stories so that you and I could actually relate to him. He's not trying to mock Abraham. He's not trying to make us snicker. He's trying to say, look what my son here did. so you can know how I can talk to you, I can relate to you and use you. Abraham made mistakes. He struggled with his faith. He stumbled with his obedience. Now, knowing this, are you able to connect with Abraham maybe a little better? Knowing he made mistakes and he's not this great superhero. Can you now look and say, maybe I'm closer to Abraham than I thought? See, Abraham groped in the darkness of uncertainty. In short, Abraham, the father of the faith, was no different than you and me. So how could God call Abraham a man of faith, the same guy who struggled to believe? How could this man who obviously disappointed God, disobeyed God on occasions, who falls short of this giant that we'd expect him to be, who made these mistakes, produce problems that have still consequences to this day, how could he be an example in the Heroes of Faith chapter? And it boils down to this. How do you think God views you? When God looks at you, how does he see you? And if you had to think that, if you had to answer that, I know I'm my worst critic. I look in the mirror and I see every single thing that's wrong. Past, present, and possible future problems. Years ago when John D. Rockefeller was running his gigantic empire, the Standard Oil Company, one of his employees made a disastrous decision that cost the company more than $2 million. Now, if I cause a problem that costs $20 or more in my family, I'd feel bad. He caused $2 million of profit loss. Fear swept through the company as everyone expected Rockefeller to not only fire the man responsible, but to take out the wrath on anyone around this guy. Edward Bedford, a partner in the company, was scheduled to see Rockefeller the day, and he entered into this desk, or into this office, and here's Rockefeller bent over his desk, busily writing with a pencil on this paper. And Bedford stood still and silent because he knew the fears, the rumors, man, this guy's going to go to town, and he's writing furiously something. He didn't want to interrupt. After a few minutes, Rockefeller looked up and said, "Oh, it's you, Bedford." He was so busy, he didn't even notice. He said, "I suppose you've heard about our loss." "Yes, I have." "I've been thinking it over," Rockefeller said. "And before I asked the man to discuss the matter, I've been making some notes." Bedford later told the story this way. He said, across the top of the page was written, "Point in favor of Mr." and then it had this man's name. And there underneath that title was a long list of this man's virtues, including the brief description of how he had helped the company make the right decision on 3 separate occasions. Decisions that earned the company many more times the cost of this one mistake. This man ended up keeping his job, and Bedford left the meeting forever changed in how he viewed employees of this company. Now, why would I tell you this story? Because I want you to understand how God views you, how he views me, and how he views Abraham. God viewed Abraham ultimately as a person who made mistakes, but who failed, who had all these problems, who caused problems at that time period and with repercussions for generations to come. But when God looked at Abraham, he didn't see his past. God looked at Abraham and saw his potential. He saw his promises, his own promises in this man. He looked at him to see possibilities. No one is ever 100% sinless and pure. Every one of us is going to stumble somewhere along the path, just like Abraham did. And I want you to know, when you look at yourself, you see your faults and your failures, but God looks at you and sees promises. He sees potential. He sees great possibilities. And in fact, when we are clothed with Christ, God looks at you and sees perfection. Because we are reflected in him through Christ. So do you trust God? Because God sees your worth. So do you trust what God sees in you is true? That's a big faith question. Do you believe what God sees in you is true? Or do you trust the doubts? Do you trust the guilt, the fears, and the failures? See, there's something distinctly different about Abraham, something that made him stand out above all others who lived during his day, something that made God pick him out among the thousands to be a father of a great nation. What would that mean? Abraham believed in God. He believed God. He still had his faults. He still failed, but he believed God. He may not have believed perfectly, but he did believe God. And it wasn't that Abraham just believed that God existed. Abraham believed God would reward him if he earnestly sought him. Look what Hebrews 11:6 says. And it is impossible. I'm going to really slow down on this. It is impossible to please God without what? Faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that God rewards those who sincerely seek him. You don't just have to believe God, but you have to believe that as you seek him, he will reward you. Do we believe that? Or do we just believe, yeah, there's a God? Or do you truly believe, because faith says if you believe in him, you believe he will reward you when you seek him. Notice what it says in verse 8. It was by faith Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as an inheritance. He went without knowing where he's going. Why would he do that? Why would he go somewhere that he has no idea? Why would Abraham go? Can you imagine, fellas, going somewhere and saying, hey, we're leaving, honey. Where are we going? I don't know. How long is it going to take? I don't know. What are we going to do when we get there? I don't know. We're not going now, are we? You imagine, he had to have enough faith, and she had to know him and believe in God just as much to go. Hebrews 10:11. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed to built by God. He wasn't looking for his next home. He wasn't looking for the next city. He was looking for heaven. So he went because of heaven. Abraham didn't care where he went as long as he was with God. He didn't care where he lived. He didn't care that his home was nothing except a tent. He didn't care that he never owned any land except the land where he buried his wife. All Abraham cared was God was there. Now, how did he know what would happen? He didn't know what would happen, but he knew God made a promise. And he believed God. And he sought after him, knowing God would reward him with that promise. Hebrews 11 says, we're told by faith. Notice it'll say this all through that chapter. By faith. It repeats it. And if it's repeated, it's important. So we need to know we live by faith. Abraham, even though he and Sarah were past age, matured, to have children, they believed they would. Why would Abraham have believed that? Because God promised him. And he had belief in him. He had faith, and God would reward that. In other words, Abraham never doubted he'd have a son. I'm too old to have a son, but God will give me one. Because God made the promise. And even if it didn't make sense to an old man like him with an elderly wife like Sarah to have children, it didn't matter. God made a promise. Just because you don't know how it's going to happen, just because it doesn't logically make sense, does that mean God is bound by these worldly standards? Or does your faith stand up and say, I don't know how, but my God's big. He'll do it. Hebrews 11:17 and 18. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promise, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, even though God told him, Isaac will be the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Wait a minute, I'm going to give you a son who is going to bless the nations, and all believers will come through this one. Now go kill him. What? Where is his faith in this? He's saying, I don't care what happens on this world. My God is bigger. Abraham reasoned that God would do something look what it says, Hebrews verse 19, chapter 11. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to the life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Had Abraham ever seen God raise someone from the dead? No. Had he even ever heard of it at this point? No. So why would he reason? It says he intellectually reasoned that God would do this. Because God made a promise that this son would be the leader of a nation. That all the descendants would be too numerous, you couldn't count them. Isaac was the son from a great nation. It didn't make any difference if Abraham had seen a child or a person raised from the dead or not. It was up to God to figure out that part. It was up to Abraham to obey. See, he'd already disobeyed and saw conflict. He disobeyed and saw conflict. And God said, will you obey me this time? Will you obey fully? Don't think of man's ways. Will you just do what I say? Yes. Because my God's bigger than the knife. My God is bigger than the stone. So how did Abraham live? 2 words. It's repeated in this chapter. By faith. There's a lot of talk about blind faith. One of my favorite movies of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That's with Sean Connery. I just love the duo there. And he's trying to get to this cup. And at this one point, he comes out of this tunnel and he sees a chasm. And there's nowhere to be. He's got to get to the other side, but he doesn't know what he's going to do, and he has to have faith. He has to step out in faith. And you see him wrestling with this. And in the movie, he finally closes his eyes. He puts his hand on his chest. He takes a breath. And he takes a step. That's blind faith. And he steps on the solid ground. And you have to watch the movie to see how it works. But it's blind faith. It's a concept that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Because do we want to move and go somewhere that we don't know the people? We don't know how we're going to do it. And we have to trust things we don't understand. It seems like this is opposed to reason. And many people have a problem with that. I need to know the answers. I need to know what's going to happen. I have to understand things before I will step out and follow God. But let's face it, Abraham is the ultimate example of blind faith. I don't know where we're going, honey, but we're going. I don't know how my son is going to walk away from this altar, but he will. He believed God would raise him. He believed God would fulfill this promise. So I want to ask you, do you ever exercise blind faith? Do you ever just sit there and say, okay, God, I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know how this is going to work. But I'm going to take that step. Catch. I used to play the game with my daughter when we were little that she could jump in the pool no matter what, and I'd always catch her. And she tested me on this. I'd have to swim to the other side real quick just to catch her. And I wanted her to know Dad will always be there. And then one time I couldn't catch her because she was too big. She shoved me under the water and kind of hurt, and we laughed. And Dad's starting to fail because she's outgrown my capabilities. We will never outgrow our God's capabilities. And when he tells us to jump, and my point is this, there will come a time when all you have to do, all you have to go on is blind faith. All the circumstances and the facts and all the human reasonings around you will say, it can't happen. It won't work. God can't do what he has promised. And you'll be left with a blind faith like Abraham. And you'll have to make the choice. Do I believe in God? Or do I believe what I can see, handle, and touch? See, it comes to, do I believe God or do I believe in myself? See, we've already seen what we see. When I see myself, I see my faults. But when I see God, holy cow, it's changed. And that's precisely what made Abraham the poster child for this kind of faith. Even in his faults, in his failings, he still lived by faith. Abraham's faith was one that took uncertainties of his life and placed them on the scales of God. He said, here's my uncertainties. And here's God, and you surpass them all, so I will trust you. In the book, The Ragamuffin Gospel, Brennan Manning tells of an incident which took place one day when a 2-story house caught on fire. Family, in the struggle and the smoke and the chaos, all left, was leaving. They came outside, but in a panic, a young boy got scared, let go of his mother's hand, and ran back to his room. That's where his safety was. It was upstairs. The rest of the family makes it outside. They find out he's gone. They're frantically looking. The firemen will not let them go in because flames are coming out the doors. And then they look up, and in a smoke-filled window, there's this little face, hands pressed up against the screen, crying for help. The father runs to that side of the building, and he says, "Jump. I can't see you, Daddy. I can't see you." "It's okay. I can see you. Jump." Little boy lived because he trusted in the one he couldn't see, because the one had a promise: "I will catch you." That's blind faith. That's what God is trying to tell us. And as we are here to build our faith, there's going to be a time God says, "Jump." And are you going to trust him? Are you going to sit there and argue? "I can't see you. I don't know how it's going to work. Do you have a tent? Do you have a trampoline? Are there others to help you?" Or are you going to say, "I'm yours. Catch." Abraham didn't know how it was going to turn out. Trudging up that mountain, carrying the wood and seeing his son and the fire, he didn't know what was going to happen. He believed in God. And as a result, we are sitting here listening to his story, listening to his events. So I've asked you lots of questions. I've asked, how do you relate to him? Do you see him a little differently? And I want to end with this question. How can you and I live more like Abraham? How can we stand in faith? How can we follow in blind faith and trust that God has got this? There's going to come a time where this church is going to start stepping up and saying, "Look, guys, we need more support financially, physically, in volunteers." And are we going to sit there and say, "I just don't know. I don't understand"? Are we going to sit there and say, "God has promised to follow me, and I will bless you"? And according to Acts that we read last week, daily those who are being saved. Are we going to believe Scripture? Are we going to stand up on the promises that never move? And we know that when he says jump, we're just jumping to a bigger promise. Or are we going to sit back and say, "I think I'll wait this out"? That's your choice. I want to build faith in myself, and I need you to build it with me as I help to build yours. Because last week, we're not in this alone. We're here as a family, as a group. So what can you do to live more like Abraham? We're going to sing a song of invitation. If you need to make a decision, won't you come? It's a simple thing. Let's live in faith.